today, rethinking democracy, rethinking capitalism, rethinking humanity itself are key things where we are just touching at the issues, but we really haven't come up with the answers. And part of what we do at the Institute is to try to help think through the questions so that we can come up to some of the answers.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks so much for choosing to be here with us today. I'm Rachel Bauk, head of PR and communications at the Berggruen Institute. As you will see, this is our very first virtual gathering. It's quite the new format for us, so my apologies in advance for any bumps along the way, but I really can't think of a better way to begin this series than by hearing from Father Gregory Boyle, founder and director of Homeboy Industries, on the very topic of extravagant kindness. So please be patient and kind with us on this as we proceed on this journey here today. We're just a quick bit of business. After today's talk, we'll be doing a Q&A. Which will be followed by a lucky draw, giving our guests today an opportunity to win Homeboy goods or have them sent to their home. So we're excited about that as well. Hey, there he is. Hi.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Hi, Father Greg.
I can't see you though, Rachel.
Okay, it's okay. I'll continue on.
As long as you can see me.
Yeah, I can see you. Okay. We're really excited at the thought of connecting with everybody here today and to share our ideas and encourage dialogue in this space and in this time. As Nicholas Berggruen mentioned at the beginning of this just a moment ago, the Institute was established to develop foundational ideas about how to reshape our political and social institutions in the face of great transformation sweeping our world. Coincidentally, the Institute was founded the same year as Father Greg Boyle published his book, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion. At the Institute, we work across cultures, disciplines, and political boundaries to engage thinkers to develop and promote long-term thinking and long-term answers to these big challenges. And undoubtedly, there are many. And so at the onset of quarantine, I had the very good fortune of speaking with Father Greg. I was able to interview him with the encouragement of Ariana Huffington. So I just want to really thank her and her team to learn more about Father Boyle's thoughts and on what a COVID-19 isolation in particular how that would affect social cohesion and building kinship. This has obviously taken on a deeper meaning in recent months, and throughout these times and our most divisive moments, Father Greg has been on, and his team have been on the front lines to remind us all of our human interdependence and that we belong to each other. As a founder and director of Homeboy, the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry program in the world, Boyle and his team have grown Homeboy into a global network with social enterprise and advocacy at its core. Father Boyle is a native Angelino and Jesuit priest. He witnessed the devastating impact of gang violence on his community and his parish during the so-called decade of death that began in the late 1980s and peaked at 1,000 gang-related killings in 1992. In the face of law enforcement tactics and criminal justice policies of suppression and mass incarceration as a means to end gang violence, he and his parish community members adopted what was a very radical approach at the time and that was to treat gang members as human beings. The Berggruen Institute just wanted to be very transparent, supports Homeboy Industries and its mission. And we hope that and encourage you all to do the same. And there will be an opportunity at the end of this talk for you to do so. So please, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Father Boyle, or as he's fondly referred to as Father G, to his homies. Welcome, Father Greg, and congratulations on becoming the 2020 recipient of the Conrad Hilton Humanitarian Award.
Thank you very much. My hope is you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, great, because it was saying otherwise. So thank you. It's an honor to all of you. And I just want to take a moment of silence to find ourselves anchored in love and tethered to the tender one who reminds us of our unshakable goodness. You know, the poet Wallace Stevens says that we live in the description of the place, but not in the place itself. So what I want to talk about a little bit is how do we hold out for the place itself? And all of us are invited to do something very specific, which is to inch our way out to the margins and to stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. We're invited to stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear and with those whose dignity has been denied. We're invited to imagine the beloved community, as John Lewis and Martin Luther King would talk about, but to consider what it means to be a part of this beloved belonging. And so we obliterate the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them, and we stand against forgetting that we belong to each other. So we stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. We stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And we stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And if we stand at the margins, they get erased because we chose to place ourselves there in that vicinity. And I suspect if our goal, once we're out there, is to create the beloved community, well, then, in a way, you know, our struggle for justice and peace and equity will be a byproduct of where we've chosen to stand. And we brace ourselves because people will accuse us of wasting our time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And so we want other voices to get heard. Kind of a parable of this, I think, of how we are to be at the margins is and a couple of years ago, my 92-year-old mother died. And she died as all of us would really want to die, which is in your own bed, in your own home, surrounded by your kids. And she had 8 kids. I buried my own father 27 years ago. And she was sharp as a tack even till the end. I mean, she watched so much Rachel Maddow. She was becoming so much MSNBC. She was becoming Rachel Maddow. And so, and she was sharp, and she wasn't one bit afraid of dying. You know, she had said to me a couple of weeks before she died, she says, "I've never done this before," you know, and it was something you might say just before skydiving. In fact, the day before she died, I was alone sitting by her bed, which rarely happened because there were so many of her kids around. And she was asleep, and when she woke up, she saw me, and she she said, "Oh, for crying out loud," and she went back to sleep. Well, she was pissed that she was still alive, sorry. But the next day, again, as rare as this was to be the only person by her bedside, right at noon, she opened her eyes and she sat up a little and she let out this wondrous, glorious gasp, skydiving. And she left us, and no one in earshot of that sound could ever be afraid of death again. But in her last days, she'd be in and out of consciousness, and there'd be one or two or all 8 of her kids around her bed, and she'd come into focus, and she'd just lock onto one of us, and she'd say with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And it's sort of how people are greeted at the margins. I look at Homeboy Industries, 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors. And all they want to have happen is be greeted by someone who will look them in the eye and say, "You're here. You're here." The homies would say that they're used to being watched. They're not used to being seen. A homie said to me the other day, "Once you see me, I'll never forget how I look." The Buddhists talk about this one greeting of, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are." And so you want to remind people of the truth of who they are, that they're exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then they'll become that truth, then they'll inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But everybody who walks through our doors at Homeboy comes with a disorganized attachment. As psychologists would say, Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so you provide a safe place, a kind of a sanctuary, if you will. And then the homies become the sanctuary that they sought. And then they go home and they provide that sanctuary to their kids. And suddenly you've broken a cycle. Remember, there was a homie named Louis who, he and his wife had 3 very small girls, and one after another. He was telling me that he wasn't there when the first 2 were born because he was so in and out of his meth addiction and into his gang and locked up all the time. And he was telling me about the thrill of holding the 3rd girl in his arms as a newborn. First time he was there when the babies were born. And he said, "Damn, gee, I looked in her face and she looked just like her mom, angry," he said. But he was telling me that when he was 9, he and his twin brother were taken from the care of his parents, who were heroin addicts, and the home was quite chaotic and deeply, profoundly violent. So they were taken from their care and given to the grandmother. And he said, "My grandmother was the meanest human being I have ever known." And he told me that every single afternoon and every weekend and for an entire summer, they had to strip down to their underwear and sit in a long, dark hallway, and she put duct tape over their mouths because she said, "I hate the sound of your voices." And when Louis was telling me this, he suddenly got gripped with great emotion, and he could barely speak. And he said, "This is why I never shush my girls, because I love the sound of their voices." And so you see people and you greet people and you welcome and hold people, and you say, "You're here," and you listen because you love the sound of their voices. A homie in Houston, after a talk, a guy, a former gang member, now working with gang members in Houston, and he pleaded with me with very earnestness, and he said, "How do you reach them?" Meaning gang members. And I found myself saying, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Can you receive who they are? You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. It's not about saving. It's not about rescuing. It's not about fixing. It's about receiving people. And the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I am closer to God than the thousands of folks I've come to know at Homeboy Industries. We were born in 1988, during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission Church. It was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. We had 8 gangs at war with each other. The LAPD said we were the largest grouping of gang violence in the entire city. And I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988, and I buried my 236th on Friday, this past Friday, a young woman named Brandy. So we started a lot of things. First thing we did was a school, because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. And so they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on the walls. They were violent. They were selling drugs. And so I would walk out to them, and I said, because they'd all been given the boot from any school that wanted them, I said, well, what if I found a school, I'd say to them, that would take you? Would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So that forced my hand. Well, right across the street from the church was our elementary school. And the first 2 floors were the grade school. And but the entire third floor was the convent where the nuns lived. So one evening I sat them down in their living room and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out, and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And they looked at each other and they said, sure, which was the entirety of their discernment process. And then gang members came in large numbers to the school, to the church property, if you will, and that created a disconnect. People in the parish would sidle up to me and say, hey, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. So this caused a great kind of gospel challenge, I suppose. And then the gang members said, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the parish, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we started stuff. We started a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members from the 8 gangs in the parish. Then in 1992, the unrest happened after the Rodney King verdict, and every pocket of poverty ignited in the city except the poorest pocket, my parish. And so the LA Times wanted to know why that was. So they asked me all these questions. And I said, I don't know. I think it's because we had 60 strategically hired rival enemy gang members who were working side by side. They had a reason to get up in the morning, and more importantly, a reason not to gangbang, and to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appeared in the LA Times, and Ray Stark, a movie producer who happened to have $500 million, summoned me to his Beverly Hills office, and he said, "What should I do with my money?" And as I look back now, I see that I woefully undershot my request. I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You know, it's got ovens. They don't work. You could fix them. You could buy the place. We could put hair nets on rival enemy gang members. I don't know. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. And he said, sure. And a month later, we started the Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries. And though we never intended to do such a thing, but now we're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. Every single gang member who walks through our doors has had their lives hijacked by trauma. Every single one comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale those walls is tenderness, which is the highest form of spiritual maturity. Love is the answer. Love is our context. Love is our methodology, but only tenderness can make love connective tissue. It can be the only thing that can address really shame and disgrace, which is the principal suffering of the poor. In the Acts of the Apostles, it has this one odd line, and it says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. I remember a number of years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. It was a social work kind of in-service, a gang in-service. And so they commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5 on some day. And it's a one-day get your credits. And I'd spoken at many of these before. And so they'll have keynotes, and then they'll have workshops, and they'll have, breakout sessions. And I figured, probably give a keynote, as I've had at many of these. And so I said yes, and I bought my ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly out, I pulled the invitation letter out, and to my horror, I discover that I am to be the only speaker all damn day, 9 to 5. And I said to myself, oh, hell no, I'm not going to do this. And so I called 2 homies in trainees. So we have an 18-month training program, and so where the homies get paid. And so I had 2 homies, Andre and Jose, and I sit them down and I said, look, at the end of the week, you're going to fly with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Oh, Lord. Take your time, because we got a long ass day to fill. My computer just went goofy on me. And so anyway, we get to Richmond, Virginia, and Jose is the first one to get up. And so he's I hope we can you hear me? I don't know. I need to hear if you can hear me. I don't know. Oh, well. Is there some way you can tell me if you can hear me? Because it's telling me that I'm
We can hear you.
Oh, Lord. Okay. I don't know what to say. I guess you can hear me. So anyway, Jose got up, and he was 25 years at the time, and he was in his ninth month with us at Homeboy. A gang member, had been to prison, tattooed. He at that moment at Homeboy, he was helping in our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. Now he was helping younger homies with their addiction issues. So not only had he been to prison, but he had also been a heroin addict for a long time and a homeless man. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, the 600 social workers audibly gasp, and he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And then they proceeded to laugh. We got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walks me up to an orphanage. And she knocks on the door. And the guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of me where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. The first t-shirt, because the blood would seep through, and the second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? It's 100 degrees. And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could resume his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. And so we go to the margins and we look people in the eye and we say, you're here. And I want to listen to your voice because I love the sound of your voice. Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. There's that Christmas carol that says in part, long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And yeah, I suppose it's about Jesus and I suppose it's about Christmas, but how is it not the job description of every single one of us? You appear and the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. So let me wind this down with a story. There was a homie I knew named Bandit who lived in Aliso Village housing projects. He was from a gang. He was a bandit. He principally ran up to cars to sell crack cocaine. I'd be on my beach cruiser in the middle of the night in the projects and talking to homies. I'd see him over there in the parking lot making his sale and counting his money as he walked towards where we were gathered. I wish I could say he was embarrassed, but he mainly wasn't. I would hand him my card and I'd say, hey, give me a holler. And he politely took it, but never called until one day he walked into my office and I couldn't believe my eyes. And he said what gang members often say, I'm tired of being tired. So he began to work on himself in our 18-month program. He transformed his pain. If you don't do it, of course, you're just going to keep transmitting it. He found a home. He didn't hopscotch his wound. He excavated his pain and his brokenness. And he gained a resilience that he'd never known before. And then we found him another job and he was able to withstand what the world was going to throw at him, but he wasn't toppled this time. He knew the truth of who he was, that he was exactly what God had in mind when God made him. And his story was so marked with terror and torture and violence that if his story had been a flame, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of his childhood. And then we sent him to a warehouse beyond his 18 months with us, and he was a good worker, and they kept promoting him. And then 5 years later, 8 years later, he was running the whole place and had a home and married and 3 kids. I hadn't heard from him actually in years until one Friday he calls me with a little bit of panic in his voice. And he says, gee, you got to bless my daughter. I said, ¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick or is she in the hospital? Oh, no. On Sunday, my Jessica, my little 18-year-old Jessica, she's going to Humboldt College. But we're scared for her because she's a little chaparrita and it's far, it's way up north. And could you give her a blessing before she goes? I go, oh my gosh, are you kidding? I'd be honored. Look, tomorrow is Saturday. I have a baptism at 1. Why don't you come at 12:30? We'll do a little send off. And so sure enough, they show up at Dolores Mission Church, Bandit and his wife and the 3 kids, including tiny little Jessica. And I stand them in front of the altar and I put Jessica in the middle. I said, let's surround her, with our bodies and everybody touch her grab her shoulder. Go ahead, put your hand on her head. And I tell them to, you know, to bow their heads and to close their eyes. And as the homies would say, I do a long ass prayer, and I go on. And somewhere in the middle of this prayer, we've all become chillones, you know, we're all crying, you know, and we're all kind of sloppy crying, and every one of us. And I don't know why we're crying, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. And so, you know, we kind of wipe our eyes and laugh at about how mushy we got. And to change the subject, I look at little tiny Jessica and say, hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? And she says, forensic psychology. And I said, damn, forensic psychology? And Bandit chimes in over here. He goes, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. And Jessica looks at her father and does one of these, you know, and he laughs and he says, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we go out to the car, and big abrazos, everybody piles in the car, but Bandit hangs back, and I'm glad he has. And I said, hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes fill up with tears. And he says, you know, I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. And I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. And everybody at the margins is barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. And so we enter into the exquisite mutuality where there is no us and them. There's just us staring in each other's eyes and saying, you're here, you're here. I love the sound of your voice. Oh, nobly born. Remember who you really are, and everybody inhabits their mutual nobility and dignity. And pretty soon, you cease to care if anyone accuses you of wasting your time as you stand at the margins and widen the circle of compassion. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. We love the sound of those voices. And so we imagine a circle of compassion, and we imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And we choose with our lives to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And we want to create the beloved community and stand against forgetting that we belong to each other. And maybe for now, we live in the description of the place, but let's hold out together for the place itself. Thank you. I yield the balance of my time to your questions.
We have had a number of questions about how you suggest prevent becoming discouraged during these times and keeping hope alive. This one in particular from Susan F. So thank you, Susan.
So, because I came in late on that for some reason, because my screen went out. So how do you keep hope alive? And
yeah, how do you prevent becoming discouraged in these times?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a little too glib about these things, I think, because I at Homeboy, sometimes people who work there, our senior staff, will kind of be on this side of burnout, and I guess I have less patience with burnout, because I think with burnout, it happens if you've allowed things to become about yourself. But the minute it's about the other person and you love being loving, then that's a whole other story. Then you are anchored in the other person, and you're delighting in the person in front of you, and you can hardly wait to show up. But if you're burning out, it's because you've allowed it to be about you saving, fixing, and rescuing people. And then sometimes that happens by confusing success with joy. I met a woman once who worked in a refugee camp, and she stopped, and it's hard work. But then she said, we had some moments of joy. And then she kind of recounted really not joy, but success, things that could be measured, outcomes that could be quantified. And I went, oh no, you've confused success with joy. And so that's a trap, that evidence-based outcomes is a huge trap, because pretty soon you're going to stop working with the people you're called to work with, and you're going to work instead with the most likely to succeed. So how do you maintain hope? And hope happens in the present moment. Hope happens when you're anchored in the other. Hope happens when you just love being loving, because that's where the joy is. Jesus says, my joy, yours, your joy complete. That's where it happens. But if it's about reaching people or succeeding, or if it's about fixing, rescuing, or saving, then you will burn out, because you've allowed it to become about you. But it's easy. It's easier than we think in these times to be anchored in the present moment and to be focused on the other, and therein lies the joy.
Thank you. I just want to read this one comment, because we have viewers all tuning in from all over the world today, and just wanted to make a shout out to Martina in Northern Ireland. It's just a comment. She's watching, and her heart is bursting from your words. She's worked with young people involved in crime and wrongdoing for 25 years, and I just wanted to say thank you, and she feels so affirmed. And I use that just because it's a wonderful segue into a question from Christopher M. On what advice are you giving to young social workers and care providers who are beginning this work and, really frustrated by the systems? And at the Institute, we're particularly, we're very interested in systemic change, and as a means to level out inequality and really handle so many of the big gaps in what's happening today, and making people feel that they're part of the process, and whether it's governance or economics. But if you have any insight into, for advice for care providers and social workers, pastors.
Yeah, part of the kind of the parallel is, we'll get homies in who have really horrible things have happened to them. On the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, if you're a 4 or 5 and a 10 kind of checkpoint, if you're 4 or 5 on this list, on this study, your chances are you're going to have health problems and you're going to have socializing problems. I'm a 0 on the ACEs study, in as much as I've never had to deal with, a mentally ill parent or an incarcerated parent or violence or abuse of any kind. But every homie who walks through our doors comes, is a 9 or a 10 on the ACEs study, which is alarming. It's hard to even wrap your mind around the kind of torturous things that they've encountered in their life and experienced. So I always say, beware of hopscotching, So homies will come in and they want to hopscotch right over their pain and their wound and their brokenness. And they hop into, good things, recovery or Jesus or church or religion or, further study. All that stuff's good. But they've hopscotched over their pain so they can get on with these other things. And it's a way of avoiding. It's not doing the work, as we call it at Homeboy. In the same way, we can hopscotch over the person right in front of us who has had their lives quite darkened and, again, hijacked by trauma. And we hopscotch over that to get to, I want to get to the systemic stuff. And all of that is good. You just can't hopscotch over anything. You have you really have to stand with the person right in front of you and receive them and allow your heart to be altered by them. But you can't cut to the chase. You can't say, well, that's all good. I'm going to go move on to the systemic issues that plague us. And you have to sort of embrace a simultaneity. We have to do all that stuff at the same time together. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And the only way we can address systemic things anyway is from below, as liberation theologians will talk about, from the people at the margins and listening to their voices. And so my only advice would be, don't get ahead of yourself. Do what you're doing and be anchored in the present moment, because that's the only place this works.
We have a wonderful question from Monica C. About extravagant tenderness as a methodology, and how do you coach your crew to stay in this state of being, given everything that's happening in the world? And is it easy to default to accountability and measurable outcomes and the like?
Yeah, that's always going to be in dynamic tension, the outcomes and the accountability part, I suppose. And yet, Mother Teresa used to say, we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. So you want to stay faithful to a methodology that you believe in, that's anchored in tenderness, that is about the connective tissue that joins people together. So if it's true that a traumatized person will most likely cause trauma, it's equally true that a cherished person will find their way to the joy there is in cherishing. And so that's kind of what Homeboy is about. And, I travel all over the country, at least I used to before the pandemic. And if there are comparable programs, they have a high reliance on content. Here's our content. Here's our 10-step plan, and here's what the values we try to inculcate. And it's all about inserting message here to young people, I suppose. But at Homeboy, we have content. We have classes and anger management and any number of things, from tattoo removal to group to therapy. But content is secondary to context. How do you create a culture where people feel cherished, where they feel held, where they feel like there's a big old net under them and that nobody's going to let them go? How do we become allies with each other in a communal place? Or as the great John Lewis called, we all live in the same house. You know, it's not we live in the same house but in different rooms. No, we all live in the same house. And he doesn't say one day we might live in the same house. No, we live in the same house. It's part of our reality. And so Homeboy kind of wants to be the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in, a place of connection and kinship, a place of tenderness, a place where everybody feels cherished and held, and where we all stand in awe at what folks have to carry rather than in judgment. And so
if I can just interject, we have a question actually from a staff member at the Berggruen Institute, who I think a wonderful segue. She is wondering, you know, what are the ways for people to get involved in your work, and what can we do, you know, other than actual giving to help out and to engage?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, do what you're doing and do it in your locale. A lot of times people will say, well, we don't have anybody on the margins where we live, which, you know, there are always people on the margins. There are always people who have been left out and excluded and demonized and despised. And so find them, stand with them. I remember I was on a panel with a member, African-American gentleman who worked on urban policy for Barack Obama. And this was during the last year of Obama's presidency. And somebody asked a similar question, how do we help? What do we do? And kind of how do we address vexing social dilemma? And he looked out at this young woman and he just said vicinity. And the word sort of hung there for a while. He said something more after that, but I just remember him saying that one word. And I thought, yeah, you know, that's right. We try to phone it in or write our congressperson. All these things are good, but there's no substitute for vicinity. You know, I'm a Jesuit, so St. Ignatius of Loyola had this meditation where he says, see Jesus standing in the lowly place. And it's an interesting kind of phraseology, because it doesn't say, see Jesus pointing to the lowly place, get your ass over there. It's, he's standing in the lowly place. And there's a sense of serenity, and this is where the joy is. And people always say this to me. They always kind of, wow, it must be hard. And I always feel fraudulent, because it isn't. It's joyful. And it's ennobling. You find yourself inhabiting a dignity you didn't know you had, because you're in the presence of folks who have suffered so much and who point you in the direction of a spacious and expansive God, and who invite you daily to live in a different way, and to it feels like it's the only antidote there is to the exhausting tribalism that grips us at the moment. And I'm more hopeful than not, oddly. And I think the pandemic, coupled with you know, the burgeoning Black Lives Matter movement, both have kind of led us to an enlightenment and a strengthening of a language that we didn't know we had. And I find that people are more generous and extensive than they've ever been. And that's heartening to me.
Thank you for that. I mean, we have a program at the Institute, which we developed late last year. I think we've chatted a little bit about it, Father Greg, and hoping to work together more. It's called Sense LA. It was developed by Gabriel Cajan, an artist who was originally based in Mexico City, as now here in Los Angeles, and working. It's a new tool for social cohesion and building shared shared perspectives and really getting down to the most difficult issues of our days. And we go into communities, and we're primarily working here in Los Angeles at the moment, really with some kind of like-minded projects. But he has a question. Gabriel Kahn is asking, how do you build and, more importantly, maintain trust between your program and the homies? Do you have examples of moments where trust has been broken?
Yeah, a lot of times I think we disqualify ourselves, because we think it's so rarefied and so particular that it's that it kind of breaks down along racial lines or class lines or, education lines. And I think, first of all, in terms of trust and connection, if you're the proud owner of a pulse, then you can connect in tenderness to other human beings. But we always kind of disqualify ourselves. We say, I couldn't possibly, be a beneficial presence. I couldn't possibly, this used to always sort of happen to me because I was a white guy working with gang members. So I had some credibility because I knew a lot of gang members and I was bearing a lot of gang members. And so I was in the thick of things in the housing projects, and we'd have meetings with other gang members and guys who were working in the streets, what they call hardcore gang interventionists. And this would inevitably happen, they'd kind of look at me, and I was the only white guy there, and I was a priest, and I was older than these guys. And they'd say, with all due respect, and they did have due respect, they said, gang members are more likely to listen to us than they are to listen to you. And I always said, yeah, that's true. Only if the task is yakking at gang members. But fortunately for everybody, that's not the task. The task is listening to gang members. And who can't do that? Everybody can do that. So it becomes this great equalizer where everybody is connected to each other. And so, I don't know. I'm not so sure it's about trust. It's about connection. And I always want to imitate the kind of God I believe in. I want to be in the world who God is, compassionate, loving, and kind, who presumes that the answer to every question is compassion. And so it's about feeling deeply and trying to love without measure and without regret as we are loved. And people get that. I think, just this morning, actually, I went over to Homeboy and I see this little guy. He's 16 years old, completely addicted to meth. Been trying to get him to come in so we can take him to a rehab. He's a gang member. He was supposed to come in on Monday and he didn't. And there he was. And he just started to weep. And he said, I just don't want to disappoint you. And I said, ay, mijito, my mind is set. You're my son. And I'm never going to change my opinion of you, ever. And you're going to be okay. So now let's get you into rehab. That was several hours ago, so I haven't checked in yet. I hope that all the stars aligned as they needed to. But the thing he most was feeling, he's living on the street. He was filthy. And meth is horrible. And yet all he was concerned about was somehow disappointing me. So you want to somehow, like our God, this is my opinion, where disappointment is not part of the vocabulary. You want to be monosyllabic. You want to just say, love is the only language I'm ever going to speak to you. So get over it. You know?
Well, thank you so much for the answering all of those wonderful questions, and for those of you who sent them in. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, and they were quite beautiful. I should just say one last thing. The last question, one of the last questions to come in was just quickly before we move to the next moment for our lucky draw. Is a question from Srinivas, and how do we cultivate extravagant tenderness in ourselves?
Well, you know, I think it's, I think we have to kind of acknowledge what is the truth, that you're unshakably good. That's where we begin. A homie texted me last week, and all he said out of the blue, I hadn't heard him from a while, and he said, "Pops, how can I become a better man?" Now we could look at that and say, wow, that's great, you know, that he's trying to improve. But it kind of broke my heart. I wrote him back and I said, here's the truth. You couldn't be one bit better. And his truth is unshakable goodness. And once he knows that truth, then he can be tender with himself, but then he can be, you know, the tender glance in the world. Then he can return and deliver that tenderness, and he can go where love has not yet arrived. But you can't really do it if you think you have to become a better person. Who you are is exactly right. And once you're anchored in that, once you inhabit that truth, well, there's no stopping you in terms of your ability to love as you have been loved. So that's how you nurture and foster extravagant tenderness, because it's powerful in the world, and you anchor yourself in gestures and endearments that become the containers of your tenderness. And I'm just astounded. My every day is sort of filled with these little tiny moments where homies are so sweet and affectionate and kind and tender. And it's a powerful thing in the world. They're endearments, but they're kind of the boxcar of tenderness. It carries love from one place to the other. And I think it's how it works. But once you're attentive to it and prayerful about it and anchored in it, and then every moment becomes this opportunity to engage in some kind of gesture and endearment that's palpable and present.
Thank you so much, Father Greg. And now we want to thank everyone who joined us today, and we're about to draw two lucky winners, two lucky audience members to receive a free gift from Homeboy, and a member, and my lovely producer, Jody Sidornis from the Berggruen Institute will reach out to you about how to receive that gift. So right now, I hand it over to you, Jody. Adrian Hillman. You are one of the winners, and we're about to do one more. Go ahead. Christopher McNabb, thanks for joining us today. Just in closing, thank you again, Father Greg, and for your amazing team at Homeboy for all the work that you do. We're really, really fortunate to have you with us today, and this this is really the first of many virtual gatherings. It's like really how we're thinking about them and looking to connect with and engage with people in our ideas and our work at the Institute, but also bringing to light the good work of others, both within our community in Los Angeles and those globally. Just please keep checking our website for future virtual events. And I should mention that we have a wonderful new partner that we're doing a virtual series within a second home. And we'll be doing a number of conversations, performative environments leading into the election and beyond, poetry events with Get Lit, and authors such as Michael Sandel and Alif Shafak, also with Berggruen fellow Tenzin Priyadarshi in the next couple of months. So please stay tuned, and thanks for tuning in today. And please, if you notice the pop-up screen in the corner of your window, that gives you an opportunity to donate to Homeboy, and we hope you take advantage of that. Thank you, everybody.